My name is Arthur Miller. I'm 70 years old, and I once thought I understood everything about pain, but I was wrong. That night, I learned the deepest pain doesn't come from an enemy, but from the one you raised, the one you gave everything to. It was a Sunday just like any other. The small kitchen glowed with a yellowish light. The smell of fresh baked bread mixed with the sizzle of green beans in the pan. I brought the tray to the table and started setting down the side dishes, just like I had for so many years. Luke, my son, was sitting at the head of the table, his shirt unbuttoned at the top 2 buttons, phone in his hand. His wife Carol was laughing while she snapped pictures of the food. The 2 kids were playing, dropping their forks on the floor. I bent down to pick them up, and my back creaked softly. Nobody noticed. I said quietly, "Luke, can you pass me a little more of the rice? I'm hungry." A sentence as simple as breathing. And yet, the next second I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Luke looked up, his eyes full of annoyance. Without a word, without asking anything, he took the glass of cold water in front of him and threw it right in my face. The water hit me hard, icy, running down my neck and soaking my old shirt. The only sound in the kitchen was the dripping of the water onto the tile floor. The whole table went silent. I looked around. Carol covered her mouth, barely hiding a laugh, pretending to cough. The kids stared with wide eyes, and then just kept eating as if nothing had happened. Nobody asked if I was hurt. Nobody offered me a towel. I stood up slowly. I didn't feel cold. I felt empty. The emptiness of a man realizing he no longer has a place in the house he himself built. I didn't yell. I didn't ask. Why? I just pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and slowly wiped my face. The water mixed with sweat, dripping onto my trembling hands. I got up slowly, pushed my chair in carefully as if afraid to make a sound, and walked quietly to my room. The door closed, blocking out all the laughter from outside. Inside, the only sound was the thudding of my heart, every beat heavy as a hammer. I looked at the photo of my wife on the dresser, Mary, who had died 10 years ago. Her gaze was sweet, but she seemed to be asking, "How much longer are you going to take this, Arthur?" I answered her in a low voice, a lump in my throat. "They forgot, Mary. They forgot the one who poured his sweat into building this house." Outside, the TV came back on. A happy jingle from a commercial filled the air. Between the laughs, I could hear Carol's voice, as clear as it was bitter. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the cold water dry on my neck, leaving a fine burn, like a knife's edge. I've put up with a lot in my life, but had never felt so humiliated. And yet, in the midst of that shame, I didn't feel weak. I felt clear-headed, more than ever. It wasn't that he threw water in my face, I thought. It was that he threw away the human part of himself. That night, in a room damp with humidity and memories, I understood. From the moment that glass of water hit me, a father had died, and another man, one who would silently demand his dignity back, had just been born. I sat still on the edge of the bed, my shirt still damp, the water making a trail on the cold tile floor. Outside, the sound of spoons hitting plates, and the laughter started up again, filling the air as if nothing had happened. That noise, so normal and yet so cruel, made me feel like a stranger in the house I had built. On the wooden dresser, the old photo of Mary looked blurry in the weak yellow light. I picked it up. My fingers brushed her cheek. She still had that same smile, sweet, patient, as if she was waiting for me to say something. "You see this, Mary?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Our boy, he's not the same." The photo stayed silent, but in my head, her voice echoed like it used to. "Arthur, don't give him everything. A child needs to learn to be grateful, not just how to receive." I used to laugh and brush it off. "Come on, woman. He's our son, our blood. How could he ever turn his back on us?" I didn't know that sentence was the beginning of it all. I put the photo back on the table and opened the window, Outside, the Ohio night was heavy with fog. You could hear dogs barking in the distance and a heavy truck rumbling down the main avenue. I looked at the gray shingled roofs under the orange glow of the streetlights, remembering the tiny rented room where Mary and I started. We were so poor that we cooked every night on a small camping stove. One time the fuel ran out, and I had to go to the market to scavenge for firewood. Mary laughed and said, "It doesn't matter if we're poor, as long as we can eat together." Now I have a house, a shiny table, hot food every night, but I eat alone, in humiliation. I don't know which poverty is worse. I lay back on the bed looking at the stained ceiling. Every crack looked like the years of sacrifice. At 12, I worked as a bricklayer's helper, my hands bleeding. At 19, I met Mary at a tailor's shop. We got married with the money I saved hauling baggage at the bus terminal. No ring, no party, just a promise. I'll give our son a better life. And I did. I worked like a mule. When Luke was born, I stood by his crib and swore, "This boy won't know hunger or cold like I did." And he didn't, dollar by dollar, drop of sweat by drop of sweat. But now, every time he opens his mouth, I don't hear my son's voice anymore, but that of an annoyed landlord with his tenant. A draft slipped under the door and blew out the candle on the dresser. The room went dark. I didn't turn on the light. In the shadows, I could clearly hear my own breathing, slow, long, like someone who has just given up on something that died inside him. I whispered, almost talking to myself, "Mary, if you were alive, you'd ask me to forgive him. But I don't know if I know how to forgive anymore." Outside the room, Luke was laughing loudly, talking to someone on the phone. His voice boomed. I only keep him around out of obligation. Honestly, he's useless. I closed my eyes, my hand tightening on the photo. A drop, I don't know if it was from the rain or a tear, fell on the cold glass of the frame. In that instant, something inside me broke. It wasn't anger, it was awareness. I had traded my entire life to build this house, and now all that was left were four walls I could no longer call home. The sky was barely getting light when the sound of the first morning bus rumbled down the street. I sat up after a night of barely sleeping. The dim light filtered through the old curtain and reflected on my shirt, still damp in spots. The cold water had dried, but the chill inside me hadn't faded. I went out into the hallway. The house was silent. Luke wasn't up. Probably another late night on the phone or with friends. Carol was asleep in the next room, the door ajar, breathing evenly. This house, I thought, was once my whole life's dream. Now it's just a shell of glass, bricks, and strange people living together. I made a pot of coffee. The strong, bitter aroma rose up, reminding me of those distant mornings back in Kentucky. Back then, Mary was alive, her hair pulled back, her face weathered but calm. She always used to say, "A new day starts with gratitude, Arthur." And I'd laugh and say, "I'm grateful to have you, and to have Luke." I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness went down my throat. My gratitude was once a fire. Now it was cold ash. I went out onto the porch and sat in the old wooden chair. The little street was the same as always. A delivery truck passed by. The radio was playing an old country song. Everything so normal, as if last night never happened. But I knew, inside me, something had broken forever. I looked at my hands, fingers bent, rough, cracked. With these hands I built everything. This house, that dining room table, Luke's life. I clearly remembered the day I bought this house in Cleveland. I was working 3 jobs at the same time. Mornings loading merchandise in a warehouse, afternoons selling papers, and nights as a security guard. I fainted on the job once from exhaustion, but just thinking of my boy's smile, asking, "Dad, when will we have our own house?" made me get back up. I worked. I saved dollar by dollar. I made payments for 15 years. When I gave the keys to Luke, I cried with happiness. I told him, "Son, this is our home. I have nothing more valuable." He just smiled, kissed my cheek, and ran off to brag to his friends that he had his own house. I was so happy then, never imagining that joy would be the rope that would later tighten around my neck. The church bells rang nearby, 7 in the morning. I looked at the little dresser by the window. On it, besides Mary's photo, was her old cross. I remembered when Luke was a boy, and I'd carry him to church, begging, "Let my son be a good man. Let him know how to love and respect." I believed, naively, that just by giving him love, he would learn to give it back. Today, looking back, I understand. I taught him how to receive, but I forgot to teach him how to give. I taught him that love is unconditional, but I forgot that respect is not. A gust of wind blew past, tilting Mary's photo. I went over and straightened the frame with a trembling hand. "Forgive me, Mary," I whispered. "You were right. I gave him everything, and now he has nothing left of me to remember." I sat down, my heart heavy. Outside, the voices, the traffic, the barking continued. Life went on, but inside me, a decision was starting to form, hazy, shapeless, but with one certainty: I can't go on like this. And in the weak morning light, I knew the path to getting my dignity back had just quietly opened. That morning dragged on, slow, heavy, as if every minute wanted to remind me of the years that had passed. I sat on the porch, my gaze lost on the cracked sidewalks bathed in sun. In my head, images from the past appeared, clearer than the steam rising from my coffee. I saw myself young again, a skinny, stooped man, hands cracked but always smiling when I came home with a bag of rice. I remembered when Luke was 10 and wanted a red bicycle, like his friend at school. I sold the only watch I had left, Mary's wedding gift to me, to buy it for him. When I gave it to him, he screamed with joy and raced around the yard. Mary just looked at me, her eyes sad. She said, "You give him everything, but are you sure he understands what it's all worth?" I smiled, answering lightly, "As long as he's happy, that's enough." I didn't know that every time I gave without condition, I was losing a little bit of my right to be a father. Then came the time when Luke took his college entrance exams. I borrowed money from everyone. I took night shifts at a mechanic's shop. There were nights I fell asleep at the table, and Mary would cover me with a thin blanket. She'd say, "I'm afraid one day he'll think he's entitled to everything." I just nodded. Back then, I believed a father's love didn't need conditions. But limitless love sometimes becomes a pit that others step in without looking. The year Luke graduated, he gave me a fountain pen and said, "Thanks, Dad, for believing in me." I cried. I thought all the sacrifices were finally being rewarded. I didn't know that would be the last time he would say, "Thank you." When Mary died, the house became an empty shell. I clung to Luke as the last reason to keep living. I took care of him, took care of his wife, his 2 kids. I thought, if Mary were here, she'd be proud that I was still being a good father. But now I understand. I'm not a father to my son anymore. I'm just a walking wallet. A soft noise in the yard brought me back to the present. Luke had just gotten up. He walked past me on the porch without a look, the smell of his cologne and cigarettes mixing in the air. He just said as he passed, without stopping, "Dad, do the dishes from last night. Carol's busy." He slammed the car door and left. I watched his silhouette disappear at the end of the street. My heart was still, like cold ash. Mary was right. I gave him everything, to the point where he no longer knows who I am. And in that silence, an idea crossed my mind, not entirely clear, but sharp as a knife. If I created this world for him, I can also take it away. That afternoon, the sun slanted through the window's rusty iron frame. I was sitting in the small kitchen, listening to the tick-tock of the wall clock. Each tick seemed to hit my chest. The afternoon meal was already cold, but I was still there, looking at the empty place at the table where Luke used to sit, the same place where last night he threw a glass of water in my face. I wondered at what point this house started to have so many chairs, and yet there was no longer a place for me. When Mary was alive, she always saved a plate of food for me, even if it was small. "Arthur, eat. You work too hard," she used to say, while gently wiping the sweat from my forehead. Now in that same kitchen, I only hear the clatter of plates and Carol's cold words. At noon, she came out of the room, her robe still smelling of perfume, looking at me the way you look at a stranger. "Did you eat, Dad?" Her voice was cold. "Yes, there's some cold rice left. I'll heat it up," I replied. "Oh, good. I couldn't make much. I was busy taking the kids to school this morning." It sounded like an explanation, but in her eyes there was contempt. When Carol went back to the room, I saw a piece of paper on the refrigerator with the expenses. Gas, $80. Electric, $120. Groceries, $350. Below, in Luke's messy handwriting, a final line. "Dad, when you can, chip in something." I stood motionless. Me, who bought this house, who paid the first light bill with his own sweat, was now being asked to chip in, to live in it. I looked over at Luke and Carol's wedding photo hanging in the living room, exactly in the spot where Mary's and my wedding photo used to be. Carol must have changed it. No one asked me. Mary's and my photo had been relegated to a corner by the shoe rack, covered in a fine layer of dust. I went over to gently clean the glass, but my hand was shaking. In the reflection, I saw my own image. Stooped back, white hair, red eyes. I wondered if this was the reward for a life of sacrifice. I went out to the porch, looking at the busy street. You could hear motorcycles, vendors, and an old crooner song on the radio. Unchained Melody. I remembered when Luke was a boy. I'd carry him on my bike, singing him that song so he'd fall asleep on my shoulder. He'd tell me, "Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a car, okay?" I'd laugh. "Just remember me, son. I don't need a car." And now that same boy sees me as an old object that's in the way. A stray cat came into the yard and looked at me. I smiled weakly and threw it a scrap of food. At least he thanked me by licking my hand. I don't know when my son forgot how to be grateful. The afternoon shadows grew long on the wall. A thought emerged inside me, clearer than ever. Love, if it's not respected, is just a rope that tightens around the one who gives it. And I, Arthur Miller, had allowed that rope to bind me for too long. That night in Cleveland, it was drizzling. The sound of the drops on the tin roof sounded like slow beats in my mind. I was sitting at the table. The yellow lamplight cast deformed shadows on the wall. On the table was Mary's photo, a small wooden crucifix, and the shirt still bearing the dried marks of the water Luke had thrown at me. I stared at it for a long time. The initial feeling of humiliation was gone. In its place was an icy void, as if all my emotions had died the night before. Outside the room, the TV came back on. I heard Luke's voice from the living room, talking on the phone, his arrogant laugh. "Yeah, buddy, everything's under control here. The old man lives with me because I support him. Imagine, if it weren't for me, he'd be on the street." I sat motionless. Every word was like a knife stab. I waited to see if Carol would react, but I only heard her soft reply, and then both of them laughing. I suddenly understood that I was no longer a father in their eyes, but a debt, the shadow of someone who had given them everything. I whispered, almost to myself, "Son, you think you're giving, but really you're just taking." I got up and opened the window. The drizzle was still falling, hitting my face. I breathed deep, feeling the cold on my skin, down into my chest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. On the contrary, something inside me was starting to wake up, a will that had been buried too long under the dust of sacrifice. I remembered the night Mary was dying. Her weak hand squeezed mine, and in a trembling voice, she said, "Arthur, promise me something. If one day our son stops respecting you, don't stay silent. Sometimes silence is just a way of burying yourself." I nodded then, but inside, I didn't believe that day would ever come. And now her words echoed in my ears, clear, word for word. I looked around the small room, the wardrobe I'd built myself, the mended blanket, the old objects I'd kept, thinking that keeping them was keeping the family. But the family had been gone a long time. Only the habit of staying remained. In the mirror I saw myself, dull eyes, white hair, but a different look, no longer that of a father begging for love, but that of a man who had just recognized the truth. Kindness doesn't tie down the ungrateful. Only action teaches the lesson. I sighed and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I clearly heard the rain get heavier, the water falling from the eaves into an old metal drum. The sound was constant, persistent, like a countdown to something that was approaching. I lay down and closed my eyes, without crying. In my mind, the image of the glass of water thrown in my face appeared again, but this time I felt no shame, just a strange calm, the calm of someone who has stopped waiting to be understood. It wasn't the cold water that killed me, I thought. It was his indifference. And on that rainy night, I knew, starting tomorrow, I would no longer be the silent father. I would be the man who reclaimed his dignity in a way no one would ever imagine. The next morning the sky was clearer. The air after the night's rain seemed freshly washed. I got up earlier than usual, not out of habit, but because I hadn't been able to sleep. Luke's alarm went off in the next room and was immediately silenced. He was still sleeping. Carol had soft music playing in the bathroom, and the two kids were running around, arguing over a toy. Everything seemed normal, but I was no longer the same. I made coffee. I poured it into a cracked ceramic mug and stared at the steam. Mary's words from the night before she died echoed in my head. "Don't stay silent if they disrespect you, Arthur. Silence is also a way they kill you slowly." I had never fully understood it, until now. Around 10, I grabbed my old coat and went for a walk. The morning wind smelled of damp earth. I walked aimlessly, just wanting to get out of that house that was no longer a home. When I realized it, I was in front of the park where Mary and I used to take Luke to play when he was 7. The old swing set was still there, the paint peeling, but the frame was firm. I sat on a stone bench, holding a paper cup of coffee, watching strange kids laugh. "Mr. Miller, is that you?" The voice behind me made me turn. It was Mr. Henderson, my old neighbor, the neighborhood electrician. He looked almost the same. White hair, straight back, bright eyes, though marked by age. "Henderson, I'm glad to see you. I thought you'd moved." "Still here. I come to the park every day so I don't get bored. And you? Haven't seen you in a while." I told him a few things slowly, leaving out the humiliation of the water glass. I just said, "My son barely talks to me, Henderson. He's busy. I guess he sees me as a burden." Mr. Henderson was quiet for a moment. He took a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and as he exhaled, he spoke slowly. "Sometimes silence isn't patience, Arthur. It's fear." That sentence hit me like a hammer to the chest. I asked him, "You think I'm afraid, Henderson?" "Afraid of being alone. Afraid that if you speak up, you'll lose the little you have left. But sometimes, Arthur, it's precisely when we stay silent that we lose everything." I lowered my head. The wind blew some leaves to my feet. Henderson put his hand on my shoulder and said firmly, "You don't need to fight or yell. Just remember, people only disrespect you when you let them." Then he got up and left. His words kept ringing in my mind as the coffee got cold in my hands. I stayed there for a long time, looking at the blue sky, thinking about his words. Maybe he was right. I had been silent all my life, not out of goodness, but out of fear. Fear of hurting my son. Fear of being alone. Fear of being forgotten. But that fear had turned me into a prisoner in my own home. When the sun was high, I stood up and looked at the park one last time. Inside me, there was no weakness left, only a new determination. "No, Henderson," I muttered. "From today on, my silence won't be fear. It'll be strategy." That night, the sky was strangely still. There was no wind, no rain, not even the sound of a car passing. The whole neighborhood seemed sunk in a heavy sleep. I was lying in bed, eyes open, unable to sleep. Mr. Henderson's words echoed in my head. Sometimes silence isn't patience, but fear. I realized I had lived exactly like that for all these years. I kept quiet out of fear. Fear of losing my son. Fear of being alone. Fear that nobody needed me. I thought it was love. It turned out to be just a plea for pity. I turned over, looking at the ceiling. The fine cracks spread like roads leading nowhere. In the corner of the room, the candle on Mary's dresser had burned down, leaving just a wisp of smoke. I lit it again and knelt. My old knees gave way gently. "Mary," I whispered, "do you remember what I promised? I promised to give Luke everything so he would never suffer like I did. Today, I've given him my whole life, and he has given me humiliation." The candle flickered. The small flame lit the photo frame, and Mary's smile seemed to tremble. I closed my eyes, my head bowed, and then, in that deep silence, I heard her voice. I don't know where it came from. It wasn't loud. It was like a warm breath passing by. "Arthur, I never wanted you to become a slave to your own kindness. Love isn't about bowing your head, but knowing how to stand tall." I opened my eyes and murmured, "But if I fight back, I'll lose my son." There are some things, Arthur, that are lighter to lose than to hold on to. Holding on and being despised only makes the soul die, little by little. I froze. Mary's voice floated between the real and the invisible, as if from somewhere between the candle and the wind. I wanted to answer, but my throat closed up. "You've lived your whole life for others. Now, for the first time, live for yourself." The candle flame swayed hard, then stopped, shining brightly for an instant. I felt tears running, but my heart felt lighter. In that moment, I heard footsteps in my memory. Mary walking in the kitchen. Her laugh. The smell of toasted cornbread. It all came back, so close, so clear, as if it had never left. I took the small, worn-out notebook from the table and opened it to the first blank page. My hand was shaking, but my handwriting was still firm. I wrote slowly. "Today, I start over. Not for revenge, but to get my dignity back. Not so Luke will suffer, but so I will stop suffering." And I signed it. Mr. Arthur Miller. I put the pen down and breathed deep. The candle was going out. The soft smell of smoke filled the room. Outside, a warm breeze slipped through the crack in the door. I heard it whisper, like Mary's voice, one last time. "Now you understand, Arthur. Not all silence is weakness. Some silences are just the preparation for thunder." I smiled slightly. For the first time in many years, I felt alive. The next morning, I got up when the sky was still covered in fog. You could hear roosters crowing, mixed with the squeaking wheels of the bread delivery truck. I washed my face and looked in the mirror. It was the same old face, the same dull eyes, but there was something different in them. A clear, firm gaze with no trace of begging for affection. I made coffee, took a sip, and opened the metal trunk in the corner of the room. In it were the only things I had left. A few changes of clothes, a small bundle of savings, and a stack of old documents. The deed to the house, bank papers, investment papers. I went through them, one by one, line by line. Everything was still in my name, and mine alone. Luke was listed only as a co-signer, not as a co-owner. I remembered that morning, many years ago, when the bank clerk asked me, "Mr. Miller, Are you sure you want to add your son to the account? And I, proud, answered with a smile, Of course, he's my blood. I trust him more than I trust myself. That trust had now become the key to my freedom. I carefully put all the documents in a folder, tied it with a string, and hid them in the secret compartment behind the wooden wardrobe. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the feeling of someone taking back control of his life. From the living room, I heard Carol's voice on the phone. Yeah, look, my husband says he's a little short this month. Maybe my father-in-law can chip in. Her tone was soft, almost innocent, but every word was a clean cut. I heard her, but for the first time I felt no pain, just coldness. And in that cold, my mind became clear. When Luke left for work, I took the folder and left too. The street was as noisy as ever, but for me, every step had a different meaning. I was no longer the man left behind, but the one moving ahead, to leave. The bank was on the corner of Main Street. The manager, Mr. Garcia, recognized me right away. Mr. Miller, it's been a long time. I've come to put my affairs in order, Garcia, I replied calmly. I want to open a new account, in my name only, and transfer everything from the joint accounts into it. The man looked surprised. Of course, we can do that. But are you sure? Your son is listed as a co-owner. I looked him straight in the eye and answered slowly, my voice firm. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I signed. Every stroke of the pen was like cutting a string that held me tied, giving me back the air of freedom. When I finished, Garcia handed me the receipts. I held them, feeling the weight of years dissolving in my hands. On the way home, the wind was blowing hard, kicking up dry leaves around me. I stopped for a moment. I looked up. The sky hadn't seemed this blue in years. That night, I put the papers in the secret compartment and locked it. Luke came home laughing, talking loudly, never imagining that everything he was bragging about no longer belonged to him. I sat on the bed and wrote in my notebook. Today I reclaimed what is mine. From now on, every act will be a reminder to one who forgot his gratitude. Silence also has a voice. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. In the dark, I smiled for the first time since that night of humiliation. From that day on, I started living as if nothing had changed. On the outside, I was still the quiet old man who sweeps the patio, makes coffee in the morning, and goes to the market every afternoon. But on the inside, every thought, every gesture had a purpose. I was no longer the passive father. I was a man preparing to leave this world without a trace. I know Luke. He never pays attention to the small details. As long as I don't make noise, he'll keep thinking I'm weak, like before. And that's my greatest advantage, being underestimated. In the mornings, I still buy donuts on the corner. I greet the neighbors with my usual smile. Everyone sees me the same. And Carol just gives me a cold look out of the corner of her eye. I started to withdraw cash, little by little, from my new account, a few $100s at a time, hiding it in envelopes in an old cookie tin. I put that tin in the back of the wardrobe, behind the winter blankets. If Carol ever decided to clean, she'd never touch it. Every night, when the house is asleep, I sit at the table and open the notebook I call my notebook of dignity. I write down every step. Withdraw money. Done. Make copies of documents. Done. Choose trustworthy person to hold letter. Pending. Buy ticket. Pending. I write in all caps, as if they were oaths. Each line is a stake I'm driving into the path I'm building. One afternoon, Luke called me into the living room. Dad, he said in a haughty tone, I have to pay for the kids' school this week. Can you help out with something? I looked him straight in the eye. It had been a long time since I'd looked at my son without lowering my head. The school? I asked softly. Yeah, I'll check my pension. He nodded and clapped me on the shoulder as if he was doing me a favor by letting me participate. I just smiled. Inside, I was thinking, enjoy it, son. This is the last time you'll see me supporting you. That night I heard him bragging on the phone. My old man still chips in. He doesn't give up. That sentence made me sad and laugh at the same time. He doesn't know that I am the one who isn't giving up, not him. A few days later, I went to the copy shop by the market. Mrs. Martha, the kind owner, asked me, "Mr. Miller, copying papers again?" "Yes, just in case I lose them, ma'am. You know, when you're old, the memory fails." She smiled, not asking any more questions. I made copies of my birth certificate, ID, old passport, everything needed to legally disappear. In the afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids playing catch, listening to the weather report on the radio. The dry season was coming. The wind blew softly, smelling of dust and jasmine. In that moment, I felt peace. No one around me knew that the man smiling meekly was silently writing the script for his own disappearance. I closed the notebook and added one last line. The more normal everything seems, the safer my plan will be. Silence will be my best disguise. That afternoon, the sunlight came in at an angle through the window, drawing thin golden stripes on the old linoleum floor. I was sitting in my room, in front of the wooden trunk that held everything left of my life. Inside wasn't just papers and money, but also memories, small things Mary had left behind. I took out the pale blue handkerchief she used to wear every morning. It still had a faint smell of old soap. I brought it to my face and closed my eyes. For an instant, I saw her again, standing in the kitchen doorway, hair pulled back, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. Her voice was still soft. "Arthur, eat something, don't keep fasting." Next to the handkerchief was the old photo, Mary, me, and Luke when he was just 6, riding on my shoulders at the county fair. His eyes were big, innocent, clinging to my hair, and I was smiling, radiant, like a man who had everything. I looked at the photo for a long time, a knot of love and pain in my throat. I knew I was about to leave. I didn't want to carry too much, but I had to keep these memories. Not because they were worth money, but because they had been my reason for living all these years. I opened the notebook of dignity and wrote, "Today I organize my memories. I keep what feeds my soul. I leave behind what ties me down." Then I put Mary's handkerchief next to the rosary she prayed with every night. I placed them carefully in the corner of the suitcase, next to a few changes of clothes. Every fold was a murmur. "Forgive me, Mary. I let our son get to this point. Now I'm leaving, not to abandon him, but so he can learn the lessons life failed to teach him." In the living room, Luke's television was blaring, mixed with shrill laughter. Carol was on the phone, talking about money. I barely heard them. It was like listening to a distant show that had nothing to do with me anymore. I stood up and looked at the room one last time. I had rested here after every long day of work. Mary used to sew by the window here. Luke used to play at my feet here. Now it was just the room of an old man preparing to disappear. I breathed deep, feeling the afternoon breeze slip through the crack in the door. For the first time in many years, I felt light. The memories were packed, and I was ready to move on to a new chapter, the chapter of freedom and dignity. The next morning I got up early, the sky still covered in fog. I put on the new, worn-in white shirt, buttoning it carefully. In the mirror my face seemed clearer than ever, without the tremble of the weak, only the serenity of someone who has made a big decision. I had the folder of documents, the deed to the house, the savings book, and several notes from the notebook of dignity. On the way to the bus stop, the street vendors greeted me as usual. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur. A donut?" I smiled softly. "Not today, thanks. I have business to attend to." The bus was packed, the smell of exhaust mixed with the sounds of the street coming through the window. I looked at the street and saw life going on, people in a hurry, not knowing that an old man was carrying a plan to free himself from years of contempt. I arrived at the office of Mr. Hernandez, the lawyer, and knocked softly on the door. The young secretary recognized me and smiled. "Mr. Arthur, I haven't seen you in a long time. How have you been?" "Well enough to do what I have to do, dear." The lawyer, now gray-haired, stood up and shook my hand firmly. "Arthur, how many years has it been? Is something wrong?" I put the folder on the table. "I need your help with something. Simple, but important." "Tell me, I'm listening." I opened the package and took out a blank sheet of paper. "I want you to hold a letter for me, just 1 page, and to deliver it to my son, Luke Miller, after I'm gone." Hernandez frowned. "Gone? You mean—" I smiled slightly. "I'm not dead, but I want to start living somewhere else, far from the noise, far from the ingratitude." He looked at me for a moment and nodded. "I understand." I wrote the letter right there, with slow but firm strokes. When the ink was dry, I folded it. I put it in an envelope, sealed it, and signed it. Hernandez asked in a low voice, "Can I ask what it says?" "No need, counselor. It's just a few lines. But they weigh more than any complaint I've ever spoken." I stood up and held out my hand. "You're the only person I trust. Keep it until the time comes." Hernandez shook my hand, his gaze serious. "I'll do as you ask." When I left the office, the sun was already high. I felt my shoulders were strangely light, as if I had left a huge weight behind. That letter, just a few lines, was the end of the past and the beginning of the rest of my life. I smiled and murmured to the wind, "It's done, Mary. From now on, no one will ever touch my peace again." At noon, after leaving Mr. Hernandez's office, I walked to the bus terminal. The wind was blowing softly, carrying the smell of hot dogs and roasted nuts from the street vendors. People were coming and going, in a hurry, but I felt like I was walking in a separate space, a different world from the one I was about to leave behind. The bus company counter was in the corner of the terminal. I got in line, my hand gripping the envelope with the documents and some cash. When it was my turn, the employee looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sir. Where are you traveling?" I looked at the departure board in front of me. Dozens of destinations paraded by, but only one name made me shudder. Key West, Florida. A one-way ticket to Key West, the soonest one this week. She checked the list. "There's one for Monday at 4 a.m. "That's the one." I paid in cash. I received the ticket and put it in my wallet. That thin piece of paper, light as a feather, felt heavy in my hand, like a key opening the door to my freedom. In that instant, I knew I had crossed a threshold, the threshold of people who decide their own lives. On the way home, I passed the market and bought new sandals, a light cream-colored shirt, and a sturdy canvas bag to carry the essentials. I chose each item carefully, without rushing, as if each one was a symbol. The sandals for my free steps, the shirt for sunny days by the sea, the bag for the truly important things that would accompany me. When I got home, I quietly put everything in the wardrobe. Luke was sprawled on the sofa, feet on the table, talking on the phone with a tone of arrogance. "Don't worry, buddy. I decide everything here. The old man depends on me." I looked at him and smiled coldly. He had no idea that every bragging word was a thread tightening around his own neck. I went straight to my room. I opened the notebook of dignity and wrote, "Ticket. Done. Supplies. Done. Memories. Packed. What's left? Count the days." Outside, the sunset was falling, painting the street with an orange and red light. I stood by the window, my hand on my chest, feeling the ticket in my pocket. Every beat reminded me that freedom now had a time, a day, and a place. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in many years, the smile on my lips didn't tremble. It was the smile of a man about to get himself back. Sunday night. The house was strangely silent. You could only hear the ceiling fan turning slowly and the distant murmur of the TV in the living room. I was in my room, the small suitcase already packed under the bed. Inside were only a few changes of clothes, Mary's rosary, the family photo, and the notebook of dignity, all in order, like a discreet greeting to the life I was leaving behind. Luke and Carol were arguing in the living room. Through the crack in the door, I heard their voices, familiar and yet alien. I told you, you spend too much. Enough, I know what I'm doing. Then a door slammed hard. The house went back to silence. I listened without feeling anger or sadness anymore. I just felt a clear separation, as if my soul had left this place a long time ago, and my body was just there to put things in order. I took out Mary's photo and wiped the dust off the glass. "You see, Mary," I whispered. "Tomorrow I'm leaving, but not to run away, but to start over, like when we were young." The wind came through the crack, making the candle on the table flicker. I thought I heard her voice, sweet and firm at the same time. "Go, Arthur. In love, nobody owes anyone anything, but you have to earn dignity for yourself." I nodded and smiled slightly. That phrase echoed in my heart like a final farewell. I went out onto the porch. The city was still awake. The distant lights reflected on the cloudy sky. Through the neighbors' windows, I saw families eating dinner together, laughing. A small sadness cut through me, but without pain. It was the sadness of someone who has learned to accept. When I went back inside, I opened the notebook and wrote the last page of the staying section. "Tomorrow, Monday, 4 a.m. While everyone is asleep, I will leave. No tears, no goodbyes, just steps and freedom." I closed the notebook and left it on the table. On top of it, I placed Mary's handkerchief, as if covering the past with a blanket. Before turning off the light, I walked down the hall and saw the wedding photo of Luke and Carol hanging where mine and Mary's used to be. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just shook my head and muttered, "One day you'll understand, son, that nothing lasts like respect." I went back to my room, locked the door, and lay down. Outside, the ticking of the clock marked a steady rhythm, like a countdown. Every second was another step toward a new dawn. When I closed my eyes, I didn't dream of cold water or anger. I saw a distant beach, golden light, and Mary's voice calling me on the wind. "It's time, Arthur. It's time to rest." I woke up when the sky was still a dark block. The clock on the table read 3:30 in the morning. The house was so silent I could clearly hear the sporadic raindrops on the eaves. I sat up, breathing deep, feeling my heart beat slow but steady. Today was the day I would leave, the day of my freedom. I put on the newly bought cream-colored shirt, the dark sweater over my shoulders, and the new sandals that still smelled like leather. Every movement was slow, careful, as if afraid of waking the past. I took Mary's rosary from the wardrobe, kissed it gently, and put it around my neck. The beads, cold on my chest, felt like a silent blessing. The small suitcase was waiting for me on the table. I opened it one last time and looked at its contents. The old photo, the notebook of dignity, a few changes of clothes, some money, and the bus ticket to Key West. I ran my fingers over the thin paper. I put it in my chest pocket, close to my heart, like a sacred secret. I left the room, the house plunged in shadows, barely lit by the dim light of the streetlight. I crossed the living room, where Luke had sat so many times, bragging, "The old man lives off me." And I saw the empty chair. I nodded at it, as if saying goodbye to an entire chapter of my life. I stopped at the small dresser. The last candle had burned out, leaving only a wisp of smoke. I put my hand on the frame of Mary's photo and murmured, "I'm going, Mary. If there's a soul, I know you're smiling." I opened the door. The hinge creaked softly, like a blessing. Outside, the night wind was icy, but strangely kind. I dragged the suitcase. I went out onto the porch. The whole neighborhood was asleep. Only the distant murmur of an early morning bus could be heard. I walked slowly to the corner where the taxis waited. An old cab pulled over. The driver, with a long yawn, asked me, "Where to, mister?" To the bus terminal, I replied. But don't take the main avenue. Take the side streets. I want a quiet morning. He nodded and turned on the headlights. As the car started, I looked back one last time. The little house grew smaller through the window, the yellowish light fading. I thought, that place isn't a home anymore, just a memory. The taxi turned the corner, the highway opening up in front of me. I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes. In the darkness, I heard Mary's voice whisper, "Go, Arthur. You're your own man now." I smiled slightly. Finally. I wasn't running away. I was returning to myself. That morning, the sun was just filtering through the window when Carol was already making coffee. The aroma filled the kitchen, mixing with the voices of the children fighting over the TV remote. Everything seemed to be starting like any other day until Luke came out of the room, yawning, and asked, "Where's Dad?" Carol shrugged. "Haven't seen him. Maybe he went to the park, like always." Luke didn't think anything of it. He opened the refrigerator, got the milk, and sat at the table, checking his phone like every morning. But when he opened his banking app, his face hardened. A message appeared on the screen. "Transaction denied." "That's weird," he muttered, trying again. Same thing. He frowned. He typed the password again and tried another account. The result was worse. "User not recognized." Carol noticed the change in his expression and asked, "What's wrong?" "This can't be," he said, jumping up, his voice shaking. "All the accounts?" "They're blocked." He dialed the bank, his hands trembling. "This is Luke Miller. My accounts aren't working." On the other end, the calm voice of an employee replied, "I'm sorry, sir. According to our records, you are no longer listed as a co-owner. The sole owner is Mr. Arthur Miller." In that instant, Luke's heart seemed to stop. "That's impossible," he shouted. "He's my father. I've had access for years." "We're sorry, sir," the woman replied. "All changes were signed by the owner. Legally, there's nothing we can do." Luke threw the phone against the table. The device shattered into 1,000 pieces. Carol stared at him, wide-eyed. "What are you saying? What do you mean you're not on the accounts anymore?" Luke staggered back, leaning against the wall. Sweat covered his forehead. He couldn't speak. Carol ran to Arthur's room. The door was open. The bed was perfectly made. The suitcase and clothes were gone. On the table, only Mary's portrait remained, with a handkerchief covering it delicately. The room was too tidy, too calm. The tidiness of someone who has left forever. "Dad!" Carol shouted. There was no answer. Luke came in behind her, looking around, his lips tight. The room returned an icy silence. He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his hands covering his head. Outside, the morning wind slipped through the window, bringing a cold air. Carol looked at him, her voice breaking. "Luke, he's gone." He looked up, his eyes wild. His voice was hoarse. "And he took everything, everything." The house, once noisy, became as heavy as a funeral. Luke sat motionless in the chair, staring at the printed-out email Carol had just gotten from the electronic mailbox. In cold, precise letters, it said, "We confirm the total transfer of funds to the personal account of Mr. Arthur Miller." He read it again and again, hoping to find a mistake. But the more he looked, the clearer he saw his father's signature at the bottom. The firm, recognizable stroke. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding in his chest. Carol was pacing the living room, her voice sharp. "How could this happen? Didn't you say he didn't understand anything about banks?" Luke answered angrily, "I don't know. He couldn't have done it alone." Carol let out a bitter laugh and cut him off. "He? Now you call him he and not Dad." She crossed her arms, her gaze as hard as ice. "Maybe if you hadn't always treated him like that, you wouldn't be paying the price today." Her words silenced him like a punch. The phone rang. It was the director of his company. Luke answered immediately, but the voice on the other end froze him. Miller, we were informed that your personal assets have been frozen, and there are problems with the collateral on your contract. We are forced to suspend you until the situation is clarified. But I'm sorry. It's the board's decision. The call ended. Luke stared at the phone, unable to make a sound. Carol sat down across from him, her voice low but cold. So it's over, right? The house, the money, the job, it all belongs to him. Luke didn't answer. He just looked around the house, the set of what he once called his success. Now it all seemed like an empty theater after a bad play. Carol stood up, took off her wedding ring, and left it on the table. I'm not going to live with a man who despised his own father. Luke looked up. He wanted to say something. But she had already turned, taking the kids by the hand. The door closed with a solid thud. He was left alone in the empty living room. The wedding photo fell off the wall. The glass shattered. His face was reflected in the fragments. Distorted, exhausted, and completely alone. Outside, the sky was clouding over. The wind blew through the window, moving the curtains like ghosts. For the first time, Luke understood what his father had felt, the loneliness inside his own home. 2 days later, Luke had barely left his room. The house was so quiet it seemed empty. On the table was a mess of papers, the phone off, and the computer screen showing an endless series of debt notifications. Every time the wind blew through the window and knocked a newspaper to the floor, he flinched. That Tuesday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Luke got up slowly and went to open the door. Mr. Hernandez, the lawyer, stood in front of him, calm with an ivory-colored envelope in his hand. Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Arthur Miller. Luke looked up, surprised. My father? Where is he? Hernandez shook his head gently. I can't say. He only asked that when I delivered this letter, my job would be done. Luke took the envelope, his fingers trembling. Do you know, he transferred everything? The house, the money. I know, the lawyer interrupted calmly. But I also know he didn't do it out of spite. He told me, I don't need to make him suffer. I just want him to learn the value of loss. The lawyer left, leaving Luke standing in the doorway. He slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, written in his father's firm, clear handwriting. You threw water in my face to erase my dignity. I drained the life you thought was yours, not to punish you, but to remind you where you came from. Luke stood motionless. The last line trembled before his eyes. I didn't lose a son. He lost his father. He gripped the paper so tightly he crumpled it. Tears began to fall, one by one, staining the ink. He slid to the floor, his back against the wall. The house was silent. Only the clock continued to mark the time. Every tick was a beat of guilt. He looked up. Around him, only the empty sofa, the broken photo, the absence, everything else, the pride, the money, his father's voice. It was all gone. It started to rain outside. Luke opened the door and went out onto the porch, letting the rain soak his face. Cold, sharp, just like the glass of water he had thrown at his father. For the first time in his life, Luke Miller understood what true humiliation was. The Florida sun shone with a dazzling force. The waves rhythmically hit the white sand shore. The smell of salt and the hot wind intertwined, enveloping everything. I was sitting under the palm-thatched roof of a small cafe facing the Key West shore, a cup of steaming black coffee in my hands and a strange peace in my chest. It had been more than 3 weeks since I left Cleveland. No one knew where I was, and no one had looked for me. I rented a modest room near the beach, walls painted light blue, a window open to the sound of the sea. The owner, Mrs. Rose, a kind and discreet widow, just told me, we all have a past here. That we do, Mr. Arthur, But the sea doesn't keep secrets. It just washes them away. Every morning, I went to the shore to sit with the fishermen. I listened to them talk about fish, the weather, distant boats. Sometimes they asked me what I did for a living. I'd smile. I was a father. They would laugh warmly and ask no more. In that laughter, I found a simple respect, the kind I never had in my own home. In the afternoons, I taught the neighborhood kids to read and write. They called me Mr. Arthur, the teacher. They were poor kids, but bright, their eyes full of light. One of them asked me, "Teacher, where are you from?" I pointed to my chest and replied, "From here, son," from a place where people forgot that respect is also a language. Every time the sun went down, I sat facing the sea, Mary's rosary in my hands, watching the sunset paint the horizon red. I'd whisper to her, "You see, Mary, here, nobody calls me a useless old man. They call me teacher." The salt wind gently tousled my hair, and in my chest there was only calm. No resentment, no sadness. Just the serenity of a man who had finally done justice to his own soul. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. In this place, no one asks me what I lost. They only ask me what I teach the children. And I always answer. I teach them one thing, to never forget to respect the one who gave them their first light. The morning in Key West started with the sound of the waves and the aroma of fresh-baked bread. I sat on the steps with a hot cup of coffee in my hand, watching the fishermen cast their nets. The laughter of the children I taught to read sounded from the next house. Life here was simple, calm. No one was worth more than anyone else. And maybe for the first time in many years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Every afternoon I went to Mrs. Rose's shop, the widow who rented me the room. I helped her with her accounts and taught her daughter math. She used to joke, "Mr. Arthur, you work better than the young folks around here." I'd smile. I don't have much time left, so I want to use what I have to be of service. She'd nod with that serene smile only peaceful souls have. I'd already gotten used to this rhythm, teaching in the morning, going to the beach in the afternoon, and reading under the yellow light at night. Every now and then, letters arrived from the city, ads, bills, or greeting cards, but none with Luke's name. I didn't expect it, nor did I fear it. Only sometimes, when the wind blew hard, I saw him in my memories. That little boy running after me in the market back in Kentucky, laughing and shouting, "Dad, wait for me." Then I would close my eyes and let the memories slide, like a wave returning to the sea. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, Luke's life was in a free fall. After Carol left, he sold everything he had left to pay debts. But it wasn't enough. Friends avoided him. The company refused to rehire him. Every time he tried to contact Mr. Hernandez, he only heard a curt reply. Mr. Arthur left no address or number. He does not wish to be found. Luke walked the streets of the old neighborhood, looking at the empty house that had once been the symbol of his success. Now, only cracked walls, broken doors, and a heavy silence remained, like a judgment. He sat on the steps, his eyes sunken, wondering if his father was still alive, or if he had died, leaving him with the cruelest lesson. Learning to bow his head, at that same moment, I, Arthur Miller, was laughing with the children, teaching them to write their first letters of the word dignity. Two worlds, two men with the same last name, but only one had finally understood that dignity isn't inherited. It's held up with your own hands. One April afternoon, the sea breeze was blowing stronger than usual. I was sitting in Mrs. Rose's shop correcting the children's notebooks when the mailman showed up. He was wearing a straw hat, a dark shirt, and had an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Arthur Miller?" he asked. I nodded. "You have a letter from Cleveland." I took it and felt a slight weight in my chest. It had been a long time since I'd heard the name of that city. I turned the envelope over in my fingers, observing the shaky, messy handwriting. It was from Luke. I took the letter to the beach and sat on my usual rock, where I always watched the sunset. The waves crashed on the shore, and the wind tousled my hair. I opened the envelope. Inside, just a few crooked lines, stained with tears. Dad, if you're reading this, it means I still have a chance to ask for forgiveness. I lost everything. The house, the money, the job, the family. I don't blame you. I only blame myself for forgetting who you were. I don't need money. I just want to hear you say one time that you still remember me. The paper trembled in my hands. I looked out at the sea, at the horizon painted red by the sunset. Inside me, there was no resentment or bitterness left. Just a serene sadness, like the breeze passing over a wound that has already healed. I took out my pen and wrote a short reply with a firm hand without hesitation. Son, I never forgot you, but I stopped waiting for you to understand me. Everyone has to learn their own lesson. I learned to live in silence, and you perhaps are learning to ask for forgiveness. I'm not angry. I just hope you find the peace that I've already found. I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and sealed it. The next day I asked Mrs. Rose to send it to the address written on Luke's envelope. She asked, "Do you want to put a return address, Mr. Arthur?" I smiled. "No need, ma'am. If he reads it, he'll know who wrote it." That afternoon I went to the beach earlier. The wind carried the salty taste of the sea. I watched the sun sink slowly into the water, and I murmured to myself, the last letter isn't to close the past, but to open up forgiveness. And I knew that, whether it reached his hands or not, that letter had already fulfilled its mission, to give peace back to both of us, father and son. That morning the sea was calm, as if it had never known the fury of the waves. I got up early and walked along the shore, letting my bare feet feel the cool water. The sun was rising slowly, spreading its golden light to the horizon where the sky melted into the ocean. I had been living in Key West for over 3 months, and every day here was a gift that life had owed me for a long time. The people of the town already knew me as Mr. Arthur, the teacher. I taught the children to read, the adults to do their accounts, and sometimes I just listened to their fishing stories. They respected me, not for money or age, but for the way I listened to them. In this place, no one asked where I came from or what I had lost. They only knew I was the man who always smiled, and in their eyes I saw the reflection of the look Mary used to give me, the look of peace. As evening fell, I sat in the wooden chair by the door, watching the children play. Mrs. Rose came over with a hot cup of coffee. "Mr. Arthur, you look happier than usual today." I smiled. "It's because I've just understood that to forgive others, you first have to learn to forgive yourself." The sea breeze blew, carrying the smell of salt and jasmine. I took Mary's rosary from my pocket and passed the beads gently through my fingers. Her voice seemed to float on the breeze. "You see, Arthur, you finally found the place where you belong." I smiled, looking toward the horizon. There, on the other side of the ocean, in that noisy city, maybe Luke was reading my last letter. I didn't need to know what he was thinking. Forgiveness doesn't look for an answer. It only frees the soul from its burden. I stood up and walked toward the shore. The waves covered my feet, cold but soft. I watched my footprints stretch across the sand and how the sea erased them, little by little. "I wasn't the one who lost a son," I murmured. "He was the one who lost his father." But this time, I said it without anger, like a prayer. I turned toward the sun, toward the light that filled the entire sky. I, Arthur Miller, had finally found myself. In the silence, in forgiveness, and in the dignity that no one could ever take away from me again.